One Tuesday evening, during the high school football game, Molly's hand found another man's on the bleachers, right there for half the town to see. The chilled autumn air felt like a spotlight on my sudden solitude, the roar of the crowd turning into a hollow echo around me. "Some people just aren't built for ambition, Ethan," she'd said earlier, her voice flat. Lucas showed up last fall, years later, asking us for wedding money. The old wound still smarted, a dull ache just below the ribs. It made Ethan think back to how it all started with Molly. They were young, foolishly in love, married in a small church. The birth of Lucas filled Ethan with immense pride and joy. Ethan found contentment in his construction work, providing for his family. Molly, however, began to express a growing restlessness. She took a secretary job downtown, seeking something more grand. Her new job brought new friends, late evenings, and a widening gulf. Little Lucas started noticing the tension, his face etched with worry. The unspoken words between Ethan and Molly became a heavy presence. Ethan felt them drifting, unable to bridge the increasing distance. He watched their foundation crack, helpless to stop the slow erosion. Lucas showed up last fall, standing on my porch with his fiancée, asking for money. Not for a down payment on a house, not for a medical emergency, but for a wedding. A big one, he said, something she'd always dreamed of. It was 23 years too late for a request like that, and the way he said it, like I owed him, still sat like a sword in my gut. He was a grown man, taller than me, with a jawline that wasn't quite mine. It brought back a lot, the way things start to pull apart, slow and quiet, until one day the whole structure just lets go. Molly and I started out simple. I was 22, she was 19. We'd known each other since grade school, lived 2 blocks apart in the same modest neighborhood. It felt right then, like the natural order of things. Our wedding was held in St. Jude's, a brick church with a steeple that seemed too tall for the surrounding flat land. There weren't many people, just our closest relatives, a few friends. Molly wore a dress her aunt had altered from a catalog, white lace over satin. Her smile that day was warm and genuine, not yet thinned by expectation. We danced to a scratchy record player in the church hall, holding each other close, breathing in the scent of damp earth and cheap punch. I thought we had everything we needed right there. 2 years later, Lucas came along. He was a healthy, screaming boy, all 20 inches of him, with a shock of dark hair. When the nurse laid him in my arms, warm and squirming, I felt a kind of completeness I hadn't known existed. That was my son. I was the proudest man in that hospital, probably in the whole county. I took on extra shifts at the construction site, never minded the early mornings or the bone-deep ache at the end of the day. A man worked for his family. He provided. He kept the roof sound and the fridge full. That was the agreement, the unspoken contract of a decent life, and I was content to hold up my end. The smell of sawdust and fresh-cut lumber became my second skin. But Molly started to look past the picket fence. "Don't you want more, Ethan?" she'd ask, usually on a Sunday afternoon, while I was watching the Tigers on TV, Lucas playing with his toy cars on the rug. Her voice would be tight, like a wire strung too taut. She'd be paging through a magazine, glossy photos of houses with columns and women in tailored suits. "There's a whole world out there, you know." I'd grunt something, maybe about how what we had was good enough, solid, but her gaze would linger on the page, distant, already somewhere else. A few months after Lucas turned 5, Molly found a job. Secretary downtown, at a law office with big windows and a brass plaque outside. It paid better than anything she'd had before, and she liked the idea of commuting, of having an office, a routine that wasn't just the house. She bought new clothes, skirts, and blouses that were sharper than her old denim and cotton. She started coming home later, sometimes past 7, smelling of something I didn't recognize. Not home cooking, not the faint metallic scent of the laundry detergent. With the new job came new friends. Names I didn't know, stories about lunches in different restaurants, talk of art galleries and plays. Our evenings shifted. I'd cook dinner. Lucas would eat quietly, watching me with those big, serious eyes. We'd do homework. Then Molly would walk in, sometimes with a laugh already on her lips, a laugh that felt a little too bright for our quiet house. The distance between us grew like kudzu, fast and silent, wrapping around everything. Little Lucas noticed. He started to shrink back when Molly and I argued, which was happening more often, mostly in whispers after he was supposedly asleep. His small face would pinch with worry, a faint frown etched between his brows, even when he pretended to be engrossed in his drawings. He was a quiet boy, always observing, soaking up the atmosphere. He heard the silences too. They grew louder than any words, these gaps in conversation, the lack of shared laughter. The space between us at the dinner table, in bed, in the quiet hum of the house, expanded until it felt like a gulf. I tried to bridge it, tried to find the words or the actions that might pull us back together, but she was already halfway across, looking toward a horizon I couldn't even see. Ethan, bone-tired, left the construction site after a long day. His friend Dave waved him down in the dusty parking lot, face etched with worry. "Ethan, my friend," Dave began, a heavy pause hanging between them. Dave had seen Molly at Lucia's, a fancy downtown restaurant. She wasn't with colleagues. She was with a man, holding his hand, laughing. Ethan dismissed it, scoffing, "You're mistaken, Dave. That can't be." "I wish I was," Dave countered, then offered, "I can take you there now. They meet every Tuesday." Ethan found himself in Dave's truck, heading toward an unfamiliar, upscale part of town. Through the restaurant window, he saw Molly, her hand intertwined with a stranger, Randall Miller. Randy was impeccably dressed, polished and refined, everything Ethan wasn't. The way Molly looked at Randy was a look she hadn't given Ethan in years. "I'm sorry, man," Dave murmured, offering support or a place to stay. Ethan barely heard him, his world crumbling, a quiet internal implosion. That night, Molly came home late, feigning an easy, natural demeanor. She offered a perfunctory kiss on his cheek, a hollow gesture. "How was work?" Ethan asked, his voice unnaturally calm, watching her every move. The final nail was in, hammered down with 3 solid blows. My shoulders ached, a familiar dull throb that reached down my arms. The day had been long, the November air biting. My hands were rough, ingrained with sawdust and the grit of concrete. I tossed my hammer into the toolbox, slammed the lid, and slung it over my shoulder. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. Dust devils danced in the construction site's parking lot as I headed for my beat-up Ford pickup. That's when I saw Dave. He was leaning against his own truck, a newer model, chewing on a toothpick, his face grim. He waved me over, a slow, deliberate motion. Dave was solid, built like an oak, a man who didn't mince words unless he had good reason. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Got a minute?" I stopped, my toolbox thudding against the ground. "Yeah, sure, Dave, what's up?" He pulled a toothpick from his mouth, tossed it, and ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. His gaze shifted, landing somewhere beyond my left ear. "Look, man, this ain't easy to say. I wouldn't say it if I didn't think you needed to know." He paused, cleared his throat. "I saw Molly last night." My heart gave a little skip, nothing more than a hiccup. "Oh, where at?" "Lucia's downtown," he said, the name dropping like a small, heavy stone. Lucia's wasn't the kind of place you found off a construction site. It had a valet out front, even on a Tuesday. "She wasn't with anyone from your office, not like she said she would be." Dave looked me square in the eye then. "She was with a man." The air grew cold around us. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. "Dave, you're mistaken," I said, a laugh, hollow and brittle, catching in my throat. "Molly has clients downtown, business dinners. That's her job." This wasn't a business dinner, Ethan. They were close, holding hands, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Dave's voice was quiet but firm. "I saw her, plain as day, right by the window table." A cold dread began to coil in my stomach, battling with a stubborn, desperate disbelief. "You're mistaken, Dave. You must be. Molly wouldn't—" My voice trailed off. "I wish I was," Dave said, his gaze unwavering. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys. "They meet every Tuesday night. If you want to see for yourself, I can drive you right now." And then, without another word, I found myself in Dave's truck, the heater blowing stale air, the city lights growing brighter as we left the familiar industrial outskirts behind. The streets grew cleaner, the buildings taller. Lucia stood on a corner, all polished brass and dark wood. Dave parked a block away, killed the engine. They'll be by the front window, he murmured. Always are. My breath hitched in my chest. There she was, Molly. She was wearing a deep blue dress, something I hadn't seen before. Her hair styled differently. And across from her, his hand resting casually on hers, was a man. He had smooth, dark hair, an expensive suit, a tie knotted perfectly. Randall Miller. I knew the name. He was a junior partner at the law firm, a man whose picture had been in the business section of the local paper a few times. Randy. He was everything I wasn't. Polished, refined, his hands unmarked by work. The way Molly looked at him, her head tilted just so, a familiar gesture, but the smile was for him. It was a soft, open smile, one that hadn't been aimed at me in years. It was a look that promised intimacy, shared secrets, a future I wasn't part of. It was a look of admiration, of quiet, unspoken joy. My world, the one I had built with my own hands, felt like it was crumbling, brick by painstaking brick. I watched, unable to look away as Randy leaned in, whispering something, and Molly laughed, a light, genuine sound that cut deeper than any knife. "I'm sorry, man," Dave muttered beside me, his hand on my shoulder, heavy and steady. "I can take you home, or if you need a witness, I can go in there with you, or if you just need a place to crash tonight." I barely heard him, the words muffled, distant. All I could see was Molly, her face illuminated by the restaurant lights, radiant, utterly separate from me. The cold dread became a certainty, settling deep in my bones, hardening into something permanent. It was almost 11 when Molly finally came home. I was sitting in the living room, the TV off, the house dark. She walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood, the faint scent of her new perfume preceding her. She didn't see me at first, then started slightly when she found me in the shadows. "Ethan, what are you doing up?" she asked, her voice a little too bright, a little too casual. She walked over, leaned down, and kissed my cheek. A quick, dry peck, feigning normalcy. "How was work?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm, flat, betraying nothing. I watched her, waiting. For weeks, Ethan kept silent, observing Molly, waiting. He followed her to her clandestine meetings, each lie a fresh wound. He needed to uncover the complete truth of her betrayal. One Tuesday, his patience fractured. He spotted them at their usual spot. Something inside him snapped, and he approached their table, heart pounding. Ethan, what are you doing here?" Molly gasped, nearly choking. Ethan forced a tight, artificial smile. "Hello, darling. Thought I'd surprise you." He turned to Randy. "Molly said you were a colleague. Randall Miller," Randy introduced, visibly uneasy. "Likewise," Ethan replied, shaking Randy's hand, his anger simmering. "Why don't you join us for dinner this weekend, Randy?" Ethan invited. "I'd love to hear about this work you do with my wife." The raw fear in Molly's eyes affirmed his suspicions. She stiffly agreed. Randy, caught off guard and trapped, also agreed to the dinner. Ethan walked away, a strange, dark sense of control settling over him, on his terms. That weekend, Randy arrived with an expensive bottle of wine. Lucas was at the neighbor's. They managed through appetizers before Ethan slammed a manila envelope onto the table. "Cut the act," Ethan demanded, his voice hard. "Both of you, I know what's going on." For weeks after that night with Dave, I said nothing. I watched Molly. I waited. I kept my mouth shut, letting the silence between us thicken until it was almost palpable, a thing you could lean against. Each Tuesday after work, I'd take Dave's truck. He insisted I borrow it, and I'd park a few blocks from Lucia's. I'd sit there in the cold, engine off, watching the window. Each time, there they were, Molly and Randall Miller, laughing, leaning in close, their hands touching. Each time she told me she was working late or at a colleague dinner. Another lie, another fresh cut. I felt it, every single one slicing into me. I needed to know the full truth, the extent of her deception. I needed to see how far it went, how deep the roots of their lie had grown. Then, one particular Tuesday, something inside me just snapped. I had been watching for half an hour, the cold seeping into my bones, and I saw Randy reach across the table and take Molly's hand. He kissed the back of it, right there, bold as brass. My breath caught. That was it. I got out of Dave's truck, slammed the door, and walked. My legs felt stiff, but my heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs that was fast and hard, like a drum. I walked straight up to the entrance, past the valet who barely glanced at me, and right to their table by the window. Molly saw me first. Her eyes widened, a forkful of something expensive halfway to her mouth. The color drained from her face. Ethan, what are you doing here? She nearly choked on her wine, slamming the glass down a little too hard. I forced a tight, artificial smile, a contortion of my lips that felt alien. Hello, darling, I said, my voice unnaturally smooth. Thought I'd surprise you. Was just in the neighborhood. Had a feeling you might be here. I didn't look at Randy yet, kept my gaze fixed on Molly, watching the panic flicker in her eyes. Then I turned to him. He was a handsome man, I'd give him that. Tanned, well-groomed, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than my last paycheck. He looked utterly uncomfortable, caught like a rabbit in a snare. Molly cleared her throat, finally finding her voice. Ethan, this is Randall Miller, a colleague from work. Randy extended a hand, a polite, firm grip. Randall Miller, he introduced, his voice a little too formal, a little too strained. Pleasure to finally meet you, Ethan. Likewise, I said, shaking his hand, my grip firm, steady, even though my insides were burning. The lie hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Molly's told me a lot about you. All this work you two do together sounds quite demanding. I let a hint of sarcasm lace the last word, watching for their reactions. Molly's face was pale. Randy's jaw tightened. Then I did it. The thing that came to me in a flash of dark inspiration. You know what, Randy? Why don't you join us for dinner this weekend? At our place, I'd love to hear more about this work you do with my wife, say Saturday night around 7. The fear in Molly's eyes was undeniable now. It confirmed everything I had suspected, everything Dave had told me. Her betrayal was laid bare, right there on her face. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Ethan, I don't think that's a good idea, she started, her voice a little desperate. Nonsense, darling, I cut her off, my smile not reaching my eyes. It'll be fun. A chance to properly get to know Molly's colleague. What do you say, Randy? I looked at him, daring him to refuse. He was trapped. Randy glanced at Molly, then back at me, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. Yes, he said, the word coming out a little stiff. Yes, that sounds pleasant. Thank you, Ethan. I gave them one last, lingering look, a look that promised a reckoning, and then turned and walked out. The air outside felt colder, but there was a strange, dark power coursing through me now. The confrontation would be on my terms. This time, there would be no more hidden glances, no more whispered lies. That Saturday, Randy arrived promptly at 7, an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon in a gift bag. He looked nervous, his polished veneer a little chipped at the edges. I had sent Lucas to our neighbor's house for the night, telling him it was adult dinner party night, and he could have extra ice cream. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. The table was set with Molly's best china, the one she usually only brought out for holidays. We made it through the small talk, the forced pleasantries, the appetizers of cheese and crackers. Randy complimented Molly's cooking. A bland chicken dish. Molly kept her eyes down, picking at her food. I drank my beer, watching them both, my hand resting on the manila envelope I'd placed on the table, hidden by the centerpiece. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. With a loud smack, I slammed the manila envelope onto the table, sending the silverware rattling. The polite chatter died. Both Molly and Randy jumped. Cut the act, I said, my voice hard, flat, and colder than I had ever heard it. Both of you, I know what's going on. Molly's voice rose, shrill and frantic, denying everything he said. Ethan opened the manila envelope, spreading photos across the dinner table. The images showed them, at restaurants, holding hands in the park, entering a hotel. How long? Ethan asked, his voice hollow and devoid of emotion. Randy cleared his throat, speaking first. This is my fault, Ethan. I pursued her. But you couldn't help yourself, Ethan interjected, a sharp, ugly laugh escaping him. Molly's eyes welled with tears. I was going to tell you, I swear I was. When? Ethan shot back. After you moved in with him? After you took my son away? Randy placed a comforting hand on Molly's shoulder. We never intended to hurt you. That's what all home wreckers say, Ethan snapped, his patience thin. Let me make this simple, he continued. A divorce, no contest, no alimony. And Lucas? We share custody. Non-negotiable. Molly looked visibly relieved, quickly agreeing that terms were fair. Ethan turned to Randy. You want to hit me? Go ahead. Would it make you feel better? Randy shook his head slowly. I deserve it more if you hit me. I'm not going to stoop to that, Ethan stated, but I want you both out of my house, now. They left that night, Molly taking a single suitcase, promising to return for the rest. As Ethan watched them pull away in Randy's expensive car, a part of him finally broke. Molly's voice when it came was shrill, sharp with panic, cutting through the heavy silence. Ethan, what is this? I don't know what you're talking about. These are just business meetings, I swear. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope. I didn't let her touch it. My own hands, calloused and steady, opened the manila envelope fully. I pulled out the stack of photos, laying them one by one across the white tablecloth, between the half-eaten appetizers and the expensive wine Randy had brought. The click of the camera was audible in my memory. These weren't professional shots, just snapshots, grainy and sometimes a little blurry, but clear enough. Them at Lucia's, smiling, leaning in. Them at the park down by the river, walking, holding hands. Molly with a scarf wrapped around her neck that I'd bought her. Them finally entering a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with faded neon and a worn-out parking lot. 2 separate photos, one of her, one of him, 20 minutes apart, but unmistakable. Molly gasped, a small, choked sound. She stared at the pictures, her face draining of color, then looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. Randy just sat there, rigid, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the table. How long? I asked, my voice flat, hollow like it was coming from a long tunnel. No anger, no rage, just a profound, aching emptiness. How long has this been going on? Randy was the first to speak. He cleared his throat, the sound rough in the quiet room. Ethan, he began, his voice low. This is my fault. I pursued her. I knew she was married, but he trailed off, gesturing vaguely with his hands. But you couldn't help yourself, I finished for him, a sharp, ugly laugh escaping my throat, devoid of humor. It was a sound I didn't recognize. The oldest line in the book, Randy. You knew what you were doing. Molly's eyes were wet, tears starting to trace paths down her pale cheeks. I was going to tell you, Ethan. I swear I was. I didn't know how. When? I shot back, the emptiness giving way to a cold, hard edge. When were you going to tell me? After you moved in with him? After you took my son away from me? After I found him one day wondering why his mom and dad weren't sleeping in the same bed anymore? The last words were a whisper, but they hit home. Randy reached out, his hand resting tentatively on Molly's shoulder. We never intended to hurt you, Ethan. Neither of us did. That's what all home wreckers say, I snapped, my eyes flicking from him to her. The raw contempt I felt tasted like ash in my mouth. You think I'm stupid? You think I wouldn't notice? You think I wouldn't put it together? I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scrape that echoed in the quiet room. I walked to the head of the table, my hands bracing against the wood. Let me make this simple, I said, my voice gaining strength, steel. I'll give you the divorce, no contest, no alimony. You want out, you're out. And Lucas? My voice cracked a little at his name, but I forced it steady. We share custody, 50-50, non-negotiable. He stays in this house half the time, with me. The other half, you can figure out where he goes. You agree to that, and this can be over, clean and quiet. Otherwise, we can make it ugly, public, and expensive. Your choice, Papa and Molly looked up, her tear-streaked face showing a flicker of relief. The quick agreement was plain to see in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, her voice still trembling. Yes, Ethan. That's fair. More than fair. I turned my gaze to Randy. He sat there, still and pale. You want to hit me, Randy? Go ahead. Would it make you feel better? Would it make you feel like you won something? I braced myself, a part of me almost wanting him to make this physical, tangible betrayals. Randy slowly shook his head, his gaze fixed on the table. No, Ethan, he said, his voice barely audible. I deserve it more if you hit me. I'm not going to stoop to that level, I said, my voice cold, dismissive. I'm not like you, but I want you both out of my house. Now, take what you came with, Molly. The rest can wait. Molly scrambled up, grabbing a small overnight bag she'd brought, along with her coat. She mumbled something about coming back tomorrow for her things, about packing Lucas's school bag. I just nodded, watching her gather her purse, her shoulders hunched. Randy stood, his face still pale, and he followed her to the door. I stood by the window watching them. Molly got into Randy's sleek, expensive car, her head down. Randy got in, started the engine, and then they were gone, the red taillights disappearing down the street. The house was utterly silent then, the only sound the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. A part of me, a deep, fundamental part, broke at that moment, shattering into pieces I knew I'd never quite put back together. The divorce proceeded swiftly and cleanly, exactly as Ethan had dictated. No alimony was exchanged, and Lucas's custody was shared. Despite the quick resolution, a thick fog of depression settled over Ethan. He began drinking excessively, frequently missing shifts at work. Weekends with Lucas grew strained. His son seemed to drift away. Lucas was increasingly captivated by Randy's lavish and extravagant lifestyle. Ethan soon discovered that Randy wasn't merely wealthy, but came from old money, a vast fortune. Not long after, Ethan received a diagnosis of clinical depression. Visits with Lucas became less frequent as Ethan struggled with basic tasks. He found himself drowning, barely able to leave his bed, let alone parent. Then Sarah entered his life, the nurse at the clinic where he picked up his medication. Her kind eyes and straightforward manner began to cut through his pervasive fog. You're not the first to go through this, she told him firmly, but you have to fight. Ethan learned Sarah was a widow with a young son, Owen, after her husband died in an accident. Her quiet, enduring resilience became an unexpected source of inspiration. Their relationship developed slowly, evolving from professional to a needed presence. The divorce was quick and clean, just as I had laid out. No alimony, shared custody for Lucas. Molly signed the papers without a fight, her face still pale and a little drawn. It should have felt like a release, a fresh start, the untangling of a knot that had been pulling tight for years. Instead, a thick, suffocating fog settled over me, a depression that felt heavy and permanent. The house was too quiet when Lucas wasn't there. The bed was too big. My hands, once so busy, felt useless and empty. I started drinking too much, a six-pack after work, sometimes more on the weekends. The hangovers were brutal, but the dull ache in my head was almost preferable to the sharper ache in my chest. I missed work sometimes, calling in sick, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the dust motes dance in the sliver of sunlight that pierced the blinds. Weekends with Lucas, when I had him, became strained. He was quieter, often lost in thought. He'd talk about the places Randy took him, ski trips, fancy restaurants, a new bike that cost more than my first car. He wasn't trying to hurt me, I knew that. He was just a boy, dazzled by a world so different from mine. Randy wasn't just wealthy. I learned he came from old money, a family fortune that dwarfed anything I could ever hope to earn in a lifetime of swinging a hammer. It was a whole different class, a whole different world, and Lucas was getting a taste of it. He was pulling away slowly, gently, but undeniably. It wasn't long before the fog became a diagnosis: clinical depression. The doctor, a man with tired eyes, prescribed antidepressants and suggested therapy. I nodded, took the prescription, and walked out feeling no better, just labeled. Visits with Lucas became fewer. I struggled to get out of bed, let alone be the kind of father he needed. The days blurred into weeks. I felt like I was drowning, submerged in a cold, dark water, unable to find the surface. My calls to Molly became perfunctory, just confirming Lucas's pickup and drop-off times. The shame of my situation was a heavy cloak. Then Sarah entered my life. She was the nurse at the clinic where I picked up my antidepressants. She was tall, with kind eyes that didn't pity you, and a no-nonsense way about her that cut through some of my fog, even just for a few minutes. She had a soft voice, but there was steel in it, a quiet strength. "Ethan," she'd say, handing me my pills, "you're not the first to go through this. You just got to take it one day at a time. But you have to fight, for yourself and for Lucas." She said Lucas's name gently, like she understood. I learned she was a widow. Her husband had been killed in a car accident a few years back, leaving her with a young son, Owen. She talked about it calmly, factually, without an ounce of self-pity, just a quiet resignation. Her resilience, her ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to raise a child on her own, it inspired something in me. If she could keep going after losing everything, maybe I could too. Our relationship grew slowly, like a seed taking root in dry soil. At first, she was just the nurse, then someone I looked forward to seeing for my monthly prescription pickup. Then she became someone I found myself calling when the darkness was too much, when the silence in the house became unbearable. She'd listen, not offering easy answers, just a steady presence. She'd invite me for coffee, sometimes to the park with Owen. Those were the good days. Life has a way of presenting us with unexpected turns, costing us more than we ever imagined. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Molly and Randy were married in a lavish ceremony Lucas described. Lucas served as the ring bearer, wearing a custom-made suit like Randy's. He eagerly showed Ethan photos of a beaming Molly in a designer gown. Not long after, Molly announced she was pregnant with twins. Ethan continued his slow, arduous recovery. Sarah, a constant, quiet presence. He began spending more time with Sarah and Owen, finding solace in their honest life. The stark contrast between Lucas's world of luxury and Owen's grounded upbringing became evident. Ethan started to rediscover purpose, focusing on a future with Sarah and Owen. Co-parenting, Lucas remained challenging. Lucas increasingly viewed Randy as his true father. This reality pained Ethan deeply, but he slowly began to accept Lucas's choices. He understood he could not force a bond that was not freely given. Meanwhile, Molly and Randy got married. Lucas couldn't stop talking about it when he came back to my house. It had been a big affair, he said, at some country club out by the lake, with a live band and flowers everywhere. He'd been the ring bearer, wearing a custom-made suit, just like Randy's, he'd proudly declared. He pulled out his phone, already filled with pictures. There was Molly, radiant, beaming in a designer gown, a smile on her face I hadn't seen in years. Randy stood beside her, looking pleased, confident. The pictures were glossy, perfect, a world away from my quiet, slightly too dusty living room. I looked at the images, nodded, and told Lucas it looked like a nice wedding. My stomach felt hollow. Not long after that, Molly called to tell me she was pregnant. Twins. Her voice was bright, full of an excitement I hadn't heard from her in a very long time. I congratulated her, the words feeling dry in my mouth. Another layer of distance settled between Lucas and me, another branch added to Randy's family tree. But I kept going. I continued with my slow, steady recovery. Sarah was a quiet, constant presence, a sturdy anchor in a shifting world. She never pushed, never judged, just offered a steady hand, a listening ear. I kept taking my medication, kept showing up for work, even when the urge to just stay in bed was overwhelming. The construction site was hard labor, but it was honest, tangible. I could see what I built, feel the weight of the lumber, the strength of the finished frame. I started spending more time with Sarah and Owen, her son. Owen was a lively boy, a few years younger than Lucas, with an easy laugh and dirt under his fingernails from playing outside. We'd go to the park, throw a football around, or just sit on Sarah's porch swing, drinking iced tea while Owen chased fireflies. Their life was simple, honest, no country clubs, no designer suits, just quiet evenings and shared meals. I found a comfort there, a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. The contrast between Lucas's world of luxury and Owen's grounded upbringing became stark, almost painful. Lucas would talk about his trips with Randy, the private jets, the expensive toys. Owen would talk about catching frogs in the creek or helping Sarah plant tomatoes in their small backyard garden. I loved Lucas, would always love him, but I saw how he was drawn to that other life, the one Randy offered. It was flashier, bigger, full of things I could never provide. I began to find purpose again, focusing on the future I could build with Sarah and Owen. A future built on solid ground, not on shifting sand. We talked about moving in together, about finding a bigger house, a place where all three of us could truly start over. It was a modest dream, but it felt real, attainable. Co-parenting through Lucas remained difficult. He was growing up, forming his own opinions, making his own choices. He started calling Randy Dad sometimes, not to my face, but I heard it through the grapevine, from other parents, from Lucas himself on accident. It pained me deeply, a dull ache that never quite went away, but I began to accept it. I couldn't force a bond that wasn't freely given. He was his own person, and he was choosing a path. It wasn't the path I would have chosen for him, but it was his. I could only stand by, offer what I could, and hope that one day he'd understand. Ethan and Sarah slowly built a strong, loving home together. Their connection was a quiet, honest, Midwestern kind of love. They eventually married in a small, heartfelt ceremony, without fuss. Later, they welcomed their own child, a daughter named Lily, into the world. Lucas drifted further away, choosing to spend holidays with Molly and Randy. Years passed, and Ethan found a measure of peace with his new family. Then Lucas, now a grown man, appeared on Ethan's doorstep. He was polished, proper, dressed in an expensive suit, asking for wedding money. All the old wounds reopened. Lucas had once asked Ethan to sign away his rights. Lucas had also claimed his stepfather was more of a father to him. Ethan stood firm, though his heart ached, looking his son in the eye. He delivered a steady, unwavering no to Lucas's request. "You abandoned me, and now you throw this in my face?" Lucas shouted, indignant. Ethan's voice remained steady. "Is a birth certificate more important than genuine fatherly love?" He had lost his first family, but he had built a second, finding strength to protect what truly mattered. Ethan and Sarah built a strong, loving home together, brick by painstaking brick, much like I used to build. It was a real Midwestern kind of love, quiet and steadfast, rooted in shared responsibilities and small, daily kindnesses. We'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching Owen and Lily play in the yard, talking about our day, sometimes not talking at all. The silence between us was comfortable, not the heavy, suffocating silence I'd known before. We eventually married, a small ceremony at the courthouse, just us and Owen and Lily. Sarah wore a simple cream-colored dress, and I wore my best suit, a dark blue one I'd saved for years. No fuss, no fanfare, just a quiet commitment, a promise whispered in front of a judge. It felt real, grounded. A few years later, we welcomed our own child into the world, a little daughter named Lily. She had Sarah's bright eyes and a laugh that could chase away any lingering shadow. Our home was filled with the sounds of children, of life, of a new growing family. It was everything I had once dreamed of, and then some. Lucas, meanwhile, grew further and further away. He spent holidays and milestones with Molly and Randy, their growing family. Molly had twins, as she'd said, and Lucas was quickly overshadowed by his younger half-siblings, finding his place in Randy's already established world. Our phone calls became shorter, our visits rarer. He'd graduated high school, gone to a good university out east, funded entirely by Randy, I assumed. He'd carved out a life that had little room for me. It hurt, a dull ache that never quite healed, but it was a quiet pain, one I learned to live with. Years passed. My hair started to gray at the temples, and my hands, though still strong, carried the marks of decades of labor. I had found my peace, my new family, a solid foundation built on trust and shared purpose. I didn't think about the past much, not with any bitterness. It was just a story I carried, a part of what made me who I was. Then came that day last fall, the one that started all of this. Lucas appeared on my doorstep. He was a grown man now, 23 years old, polished and proper in an expensive suit, a perfect replica of Randy. He stood there on the porch of the house I had built for Molly and me, the house where he had grown up, and asked me to pay for his wedding. All the old wounds resurfaced, fresh and stinging. I remembered the way he had looked at Randy, the adoration in his eyes. I remembered the conversation a few years back when he was just 15 asking me if I would sign away my parental rights so Randy could adopt him. "He's more of a father to me anyway, Dad," he'd said, his voice young and unthinking, but the words had sliced deep. I had refused then too, my hand trembling as I told him no. Now he stood before me, expecting me to write a check, to be a silent financier for a wedding where I would likely be a mere spectator. I looked at him, my son, this man who was almost a stranger, and my heart ached with a familiar, quiet pain. But I stood firm. I had learned to stand firm. "No," I said, my voice steady, meeting his gaze. "I won't be paying for your wedding, Lucas." He recoiled as if I had struck him. His perfect composure cracked, revealing a flash of indignation. "You abandoned me, and now you throw this in my face?" he shouted, his voice rising, echoing a petulant boy. My voice remained steady, calm, betraying nothing of the hurt inside. "Is a birth certificate more important than genuine fatherly love, Lucas? Because I was here. I always was. You were the one who made the choice to leave. I had lost my first family, had watched it crumble to dust. But I had built a second, strong and true. And now, finally, I had the strength to protect what truly mattered, to draw a line even with my own son." Lucas left that day, the sound of his expensive car fading down the street. The quiet of the afternoon settled back over my house, thick and familiar. I didn't chase him. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been shown over 23 years. The paths we'd all chosen had diverged. Molly had her grand life with Randy, her twins, a world built on a different ambition, one I barely recognized. Lucas had walked that path with them, and now he was asking me to fund its next milestone. It was a clear echo of the past, of someone always wanting something more, something I either couldn't or wouldn't provide. Sarah walked in then, her hand finding mine without a word. A silent understanding passed between us. Lily was asleep upstairs, Owen doing his homework at the kitchen table. This was my life now. It wasn't the one I had started, but it was real. It was built on solid ground, earned with steady hands and a hard-won peace. The cost of getting here had been high, the lessons often bitter. But with Sarah beside me, I knew I had learned what truly mattered. You build what you can, protect what you have, and accept the quiet choices people make, even when they're not your own.